there's so much in Joshua chapter 3 and that we can learn from. And realistically, this is one of the reasons that we want to, we want to be in the Bible on a regular basis. You can make it through life without reading the Bible, and plenty of people do. But if we can learn to draw insight and strength and excitement and inspiration from the scripture, there's so much guidance that's buried there. It's absolutely wonderful. Now, excuse me, as we open Joshua chapter 3, what we should know is where Israel is. Does everybody kind of have a picture? It just dawned on me right this second that maybe everybody kind of have an idea of where Israel is in the map of Jordan and all that stuff. Maybe let me see if I didn't even think about it till just now, but let me see what I can do about bringing up a map of Israel that might help here. Yeah, okay. Now I got to do a show. Whoops, what was that? That was interesting. Do a share screen guy. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Share. And you guys should see a map of Israel. Do you see a map of Israel?
Yes, we do.
Good, that sounds great. Okay, so, and Rob, can you guys see my cursor on it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So Israel came up out of Egypt. They wandered around in the wilderness, and that's Southwest Arabia down off the map down here to your right-hand corner. Wandered around down there for 40 years until that generation died off. And then they came up around the backside of Israel. And if you remember, the Moabites with Balak, the king, and Balaam, the prophet, they were frightened of Israel going by. And so Balak, the king, hired Balaam, the prophet, and he went out to curse Israel. But all he could do was bless Israel. Eventually, Israel and Moab got in a war. And then as Israel came up toward Ammon, and in this area up here, the area of the Amorites, this area then was given to the half tribe of Manasseh and Gad and Reuben. They got the tribal areas over here in what's called the Transjordan. And then Israel ended up here. Gosh, that's pretty small. If I could read it correctly, that's Jericho right about there. And so Israel ended up down here in this area right here on the east side of the Jordan River. And they're about to cross over. And so that's where we are as Joshua opens. And remember that this whole area over here was then called the Promised Land. And it was called the Promised Land because it had been promised to Abraham, and then again promised to Isaac, and then again promised to Jacob, and then in general promised to Israel. And then Israel under Jacob had made some mistakes, gone down to Egypt. There was a famine, but when the famine was over, they didn't leave, and eventually they became enslaved. God had to get them out of Egypt. But now they're on the brink of the Promised Land, and they're about to go over. Well, in the meantime, the tribes over here in the Promised Land had multiplied and fortified themselves. If you remember, even 40 years before, when the Israelites first came out of Egypt and sent spies up into the Promised Land, they said the people there are huge and the cities are walled up to heaven. And so that now here is Israel, and they're about to go in there, and realistically they're not too much more prepared for war than they were 40 years before. So you can see why they might be a little hesitant. So let's go back to we'll go back to the scripture. So chapter 3 verse 1, Joshua rose up early in the morning, and they moved from Shittim and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel. And by the way, the town of Shittim, we believe that archaeologically we have discovered that, and that is in the east area of the Jordan, where I had said on the east bank. Um, they came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and they camped there before they crossed over. Now it's going to say later on, and I want to share my screen again. It's going to say later on. I wish I could figure out a way to make this picture bigger, but I'm gonna share my screen, and I hope y'all can see this. Let's see, share. Okay, so it's a black and white photograph from the 20s, but can you all see a little bridge right here? There's little bridge girders.
Yes.
That is the Allenby Bridge. And the Allenby Bridge is still there today. Now the Jordan doesn't flood like it used to flood. But if, you know, when people go with me to see the Jordan River today, it's this little dinky thing, maybe 20 feet wide, 15 feet wide, going underneath this bridge in here. But they built dams on the Jordan and in the Jabbok and in the Yarmouk and in the rivers leading up to the Jordan. Plus the water of the Jordan has been tapped down for irrigation to the point that the Jordan River does not flood anymore. So we don't see this kind of phenomenon like they saw it in the 20s. But at this point in time, everything you're looking at, this down here, this whole thing, this is not sand. This is the Jordan River at flood stage, and it was perhaps every bit as a mile wide. I mean,
Wow.
it is the entire Jordan Valley flooded at the time of the harvest. And so this is that picture from the 20s showing that. So I'm going to go back to so that's where Israel got. Gotcha. So later, okay. Okay, I'm back. So that's what Israel was looking at. When they got to the plains of Jordan, they weren't looking at a little dinky 15-foot river that we've got to cross. They were looking at something that was perhaps a mile wide. And you know, if you've ever walked through a marshy area, if you remember on the sides of the Jordan, it was real brushy and weedy and tangly, and all that stuff is underwater. It would be, you know, basically almost impossible to walk through. And that's where they came to. So Joshua comes to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and they camped there before they crossed over. Verse 2, and it came to pass after 3 days, the officers went through the midst of the camp. So now the officers go through the midst of the camp, and there's no explanation for the 3 days. You know, you will look in vain to find out, you know, why was it that they camped there for 3 days? And my guess is that this is God's plan and God's typology for the 3 days and 3 nights that Jesus would be in the heart of the earth. Because the children of Israel had been in the wilderness for 40 years, just like, and the 40, of course, is the period of testing, just like Jesus Christ had been in the wilderness of his life for his life period. And then he died for 3 days and 3 nights. And what's on the other side of death for Christ? The promised land. And what's on the other side of this? They've been in the wilderness for 40 years. Now they just sit for 3 days and 3 nights. Now they're going to cross into the promised land. Can I prove what I just taught you? No, but I believe that's the only thing I've ever seen that makes sense, that this is part of the typology of the picture that God was painting about Jesus Christ. In verse 3, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of Yahweh your God and the priests, the Levites, carrying it, then you are to set out from your place and follow it. And I'm going to be talking more about the ark of the covenant of Yahweh your God, because the Israelites were, at least they were aware enough, they were self-aware enough to know that, number one, they weren't going to be able to cross the Jordan River without some help. And number two, they certainly weren't going to be able to conquer the Canaanites without some help. And so they needed that confidence of God. And for 40 years in the wilderness, the ark in the tabernacle had been in the center of the Israelite camp. And every day there was a pillar of smoke, and every night there was a pillar of fire, and there was no question about God is in the midst of the camp. If anything, I would say it even led to familiarity breeding contempt, because when you read about the Israelites, you think, my gosh, if you and I, you run a home fellowship and you go outside your house and you look up and there's this giant pillar of fire coming out of the top of your house, people would be saying, whoa, there's something seriously spiritual going on inside. But after 40 years, day and night, the Israelites had gotten too used to this, I think. But they still knew at some fundamental level they needed God. And so here, Joshua commands the people, when you see the ark of the covenant of Yahweh your God and the priests, the Levites carrying it, then you are to set out from your place and follow it. And we're going to see that the centrality of the ark of the covenant is huge here. The phrase ark of the covenant is going to occur 10 times in Joshua 3 alone. It occurs in many other chapters, but just in chapter 3 alone, it occurs 10 times. And then verse 4, there's to be a space between you and it about 2,000 cubits by measure. So 2,000 cubits is cubit, given a normal cubit is about 1.5 feet, or we'd say about 3,000 feet. So that's what, is that how many football fields is that? 3,000 feet. They're 300 feet in a football field. So it'd be like 10 football fields, if you can kind of picture that. And he says 2,000 cubits by measure. Oh, by the way, if you remember the New Testament, there was a space called the Sabbath day's journey, that the people were allowed to walk on the Sabbath, a Sabbath day's journey. That Sabbath day's journey was 2,000 cubits, and this is where they got it. They said, oh, look, and the priests grabbed this number, and that's where they got the 2,000 cubit measure. Do not come near to it, so that you will know the way by which you must go. Because if it stayed out about 2/3 of a mile, then everybody would see it. And he says, for you have not passed this way before. Now, the verse 5 really caught my attention. And Bill and I talked quite a bit about how to translate this. In almost every English version, although things are beginning to shift, it says, Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow Yahweh will do wonders among you. The problem is that for most people, sanctify yourselves doesn't mean anything. It simply doesn't relate. And the Hebrew is very clear. What, as Bill and I looked at this, as we read some commentaries, as we discussed it, the Hebrew is very clear. The Hebrew is basically exactly like the REB translation, make yourselves holy. And that's very bold. And there's a lot of translators that are they're not really willing to go there. They're like, now, the fact is that the phrase sanctify yourselves, if you know what it means, some of the versions say consecrate yourselves. If you know what the phraseology means, it means make yourself holy. Sanctify yourself or consecrate yourself, it means make yourself holy. But there's something bolder about the translation, make yourself holy. We kind of hide it with sanctify. Oh, sanctify yourselves. But I think this is really huge for us, because if we go back into the history of Israel, and here are the Israelites, and they're on the border of the Jordan River, and they're not going to be able to cross, and they're not going to be able to conquer the land unless God is with them and God helps them. And so what God is doing here is he's setting down parameters. So you want me with you? Yeah. So you want me to help you? Okay. Well, what are you going to do? You think I'm just going to show up and you're just going to live your life and, you do whatever you want. I'm going to show up and help you? No, you make yourself holy. You bring yourself up to my standard. And that's what God's saying here. You bring yourself up to my standard. Now, what's that going to be? Well, there's an external job and there's an internal job. The external job is, okay, I give up. I wish I could tell you more about why this is, but for some reason, God says abstain from sex. I can't explain the depth of it, but in other words, okay, you guys are camped at the edge of Jordan. You want my help? Abstain for sex. I don't know why, but that's part in the Old Testament law, which you can read about in the book of Exodus, for example, Exodus 19. You can read that was part of the gig. Also, if you needed to do a sacrifice for some reason, you had sinned or you'd committed a trespass or you'd become unclean and you needed to do a sacrifice, well, buck up. Well, I don't feel like doing a sacrifice now. You see, this is huge. This is outward ordinances. Again, I'm going to talk about outward ordinances and inward ordinances. And the outward ordinances, I don't care, God, I don't care if you don't feel like doing a sacrifice, make yourself holy, get the sacrifice done. For some people, you have to wash, they're unclean. They have to wash their bodies, wash their clothes. Well, I don't feel like washing my clothes. Well, wash your dang clothes. It's from God's perspective. It's like God saying, look, I, the creator of heavens and earth, am going to be among you. So, I've got standards. Bring yourself up to those standards. And so the external for the Old Testament would be things like wash your clothes, wash your body, do your sacrifice, abstain from sex, and there would be these external things. And then internally, it's also what you and I know, turn in your heart to God. Don't be out there messing around in your brain thinking about, what other gods can help you out and what are kind of lucky charms and household gods and whatever else you've got that's going to help you out. Turn your heart to God. Remember that the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4, hear, O Israel, Yahweh is your God, Yahweh alone. Or in the Shema, Yahweh is our God, Yahweh alone. So, so there's also a turning in the heart to God. And so it's really what God is doing. And I think about the Christians. Do we have something like this where, where there are things that we just do, whether we feel like them or not? What if you're in the Old Testament? I don't feel like not having sex. I want to make love to my wife tonight. I don't feel like doing a sacrifice. I like all my sheep. I don't feel like killing one tonight. I don't feel like taking a bath tonight. I know I got unclean yesterday, but I don't feel like it. God's like, no, I'm sorry. That's not the way it works. You fulfill these external things. And so then you and I have the same kind of thing. Let's go to John chapter 14. So here's Jesus Christ, and this is the Last Supper. And so Jesus Christ is going to take the essence of this statement, which, by the way, make yourself holy occurs not just here in Joshua chapter 3, it's also in, let me see, it's either Leviticus 4:11 or 11:4. I can't remember which right now. It's in Leviticus 20 verse 7. It's in some other places as well. But here we are, we move forward to the Last Supper, and Jesus Christ says, whoever has my commands. Okay, we got the commands. We know what you've said. We got the commands. Oh, and is keeping them. Oh, well, yeah. Well, yeah, I had them on a list here, but I wasn't paying particular attention to them. here's Christ, and he says, okay, number one, you got to have the commands, but then two, you got to be keeping them. What's that like? That's like in the Old Testament, make yourself holy. So he says, whoever has my commands and is keeping them, that is the one who loves me. And whoever loves me will be loved by my Father, and I will love him and will reveal myself to him. God says, make yourself holy. I want to be among you. And then he was palpably when Israel was obeying, then God really showed up, and you know that, and we can see that in the wars of Canaan and in the judges and that kind of thing. And here Christ is saying the same thing. Whoever loves me will be loved by my Father. I will reveal myself to him. And it's not just a one-time reveal. It's just like, yeah, I kind of ran into Christ one time. it's a revealing in a relationship. And I love what happens next, because the apostles, they don't, this is the Last Supper, they don't know a thing. They don't even know Christ is going to die. They should have by the Last Supper, but they didn't. Much less be resurrected, much less the ascension. They had no idea Christ was going to leave the earth. So here's Jesus, and he's at a dinner with them, and he's talking, and he says, if you keep my commandments, I'm going to reveal myself to you. They're all looking at him. We see you. There you are. So we're confused. What are you talking about? Reveal yourself to us. And that's exactly what Judas says here. He says, Lord, how is it that you will reveal yourself to us and not to the world? And Jesus answered and said to him, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home with him. See, this is the equivalent in the Old Testament. God says, I will be among you. I will be among you. You will see me. You will know me. I will do things. I'll make myself known to you. And here's Christ. If you have the commandments and you keep them, I'm going to reveal myself. Judas, what does that mean? It means I'm going to make my home with you. You're going to see me regularly. I'm going to show up for you in palpable ways, tangible ways that will show you that I am in your life. And this is exactly what is going on with Christ. So now in the Old Testament, okay, sacrifices, wash your clothes, wash your body, don't have sex, okay, New Testament, we don't have to do that stuff. Yay! Oh, but he says, I want you to pray. I want you to give of your material stuff or whatever you've got. Don't be a stingy, is what God's saying. Love and be kind. No keyboard courage. Don't go pounding out messages that are totally unkind to people all the time. And we start thinking through, well, people in the Old Testament had those commands, and they were asked to do them whether they felt like doing them or not. Okay, today in the New Testament, it's the same thing. We have these commands, and we are to do them whether we feel like doing them or not. We're not, well, I don't feel like praying today. Well, fine. That doesn't mean you don't pray. I don't feel like doing a sacrifice today. That doesn't mean you don't kill a sheep. We break through that because there's external and internal. Then we, in our hearts, then we turn to God as well. But it will help us turn to God on the inside if we turn to him on the outside. If we go through the motions. In his book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, Dale Carnegie, and you may know when he actually wrote that. We had to read that when we were in the Corps. Was that in the 50s or 40s or 30s or whenever Carnegie wrote that book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living? He said that feelings follow action, and that it's the not Mary Poppins, who's the Sound of Music thing. Whistle a happy tune, and pretty soon you're not afraid. And that's really what this is about. God's saying, if you will do the outward actions, then the heart will follow. And that's really part of the command here. So let's hop back to Joshua chapter 3. And so I love this, the power of this for God to come and just boldly say, Joshua said to the people, this is Joshua 3:5, make yourselves holy, for tomorrow Yahweh will do wonders among you. And it's not just tomorrow. It was, tomorrow and then, on and on and on. Verse 6 rather. And Joshua spoke to the priests saying, take up the Ark of the Covenant. There's mentioned again, and cross over before the people. The word before here is got multiple meanings in the Hebrew, because it means in front of. When he crosses in front of, the ark is going to move in front of. But the word before in Hebrew also means in the presence of. And both of those meanings are important here in this particular text, because the ark was to go in front of the people, but also it was in the presence of the people. They could all see it. They knew where God was. That made them feel comfortable. It made them feel confident to know where God was and that he would be a help. So they took up the Ark of the Covenant and went before the people. Verse 7, Yahweh said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to make you great in the sight of all Israel, so they will know that as I was with Moses, I will be with you," which was always important for leadership. That, leadership sets an example and the people can follow that leader with confidence. Verse 8, "You are to command the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, saying, when you come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you are to stand still in the Jordan." And so basically they're going to walk in to the water. It doesn't say how far they walked in, but they walked in a little bit. Verse 9, "And Joshua said to the children of Israel, draw near and listen to the words of Yahweh your God." Verse 10, Joshua said, "This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will drive out, yes, drive out from before you the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Hivite, the Perizzite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, and the Jebusite." Now these 7 nations are the same seven nations that are mentioned in Deuteronomy 7, when on the edge, they were on the edge of the promised land. Deuteronomy was in the last 30 days of the wilderness, or the last 60 days of the wilderness wanderings. And so in Deuteronomy 7, God enumerated these 7 nations and said, you're going to drive them out. And here, now Joshua says, this is how you know that this is going to happen. And notice that he goes then, "Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is crossing over before you into Jordan." So the idea is, look, your God, your king, is going ahead of you, going in your presence, right into the Jordan. Verse 12. And you can imagine, remember they camped there for 3 days. Well, they're camping there for 3 days and looking at this Jordan that's a mile wide. How many of them do you think thought, how in the world are we going to pull this off? Because there wasn't any revelation. I remember I was listening to a teaching one time on the fall of Jericho by Chuck Swindoll, and he did such a great job with that teaching. And Joshua comes to his army and says, "Okay, here's the way it's going to work. We're going to march around the city for 7 days, and then the walls are going to fall down." And one of his generals turns to another guy and says, "That sounds really dumb." And yet, the revelation of God, they're staring at this river a mile wide, and they don't have boats. And they're like, wow, we're going to cross over there in 3 days. I don't know how we're going to do it. And yet, if we're just patient and wait for God's revelation. And so the Ark of the Covenant, verse 11, is crossing over before you into the Jordan, verse 12. "And now take for yourselves 12 men out of the tribes of Israel, 1 man from each tribe." Verse 13, "It will come to pass when the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of Yahweh of the Lord, carry the ark of Yahweh, the Lord of all the earth, come to rest in the waters of the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan will be cut off, and the waters coming down from above will stand up in one heap." Very clearly a miracle of God. And notice again how the ark of God is mentioned prominently. They carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. And then the waters are going to stand up in a heap. Verse 14, "It came to pass when the people moved from their encampment to cross the Jordan, the priests who carried the ark of the covenant went before the people." Verse 15, "And when those who carried the ark," look at that, the ark of the covenant, they carried the ark, the people with the ark, "had come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests, those carrying the ark, dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest." Verse 16, the waters coming down from above stood and rose up in one heap, a great way off, at Adam, the city that's beside Zarethan. And those that went down toward the sea, those waters that went down toward the sea of the Arabah, even the Salt Sea, when I call it the Dead Sea, were completely cut off. Then the people crossed over opposite Jericho. And then and again, that's right, basically exactly where the Allenby Bridge is. So the Allenby Bridge leads from right now from the country of Jordan across the Jordan River right into Jericho. So that area where the Allenby Bridge is, that photograph that we saw, is the area where the Israelites crossed. And you saw that that water was flooded for as far as you could see. So verse 16, again, the waters coming down stood and rose up in a heap. And those that went down toward the sea of the Arabah, even the Salt Sea, were completely cut off. The people crossed over opposite Jericho. Verse 17, and the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant stood firm, and this is interesting, and Bill and I had quite a discussion about this, stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. And then it repeats it, and all Israel crossed over on dry ground. Now, you and I know what the ground looks like after it stops raining. And it's not dry, it's muddy. And if the Jordan's been flooded for weeks, it's muddy. But the Hebrew text is very clear. Now, if God can make the water of the Jordan River stand up in a heap, then he's fully capable of drying the ground out. He just got out his heavenly blow dryer, just blew for a couple minutes, and poof, the water the ground is all dry, and the water is gone. And I think that's, when you read, if you keep reading about the Canaanites, for example, in Jericho, and they heard that Israel crossed on dry ground, and then it says the Rahab the prostitute said, our hearts melted. I mean, they're just like, oh. I mean, the Canaanites had gods, but they didn't have any God that could do anything even remotely like that. And this is the power of God. And what we're going to learn is the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant stood on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. And I want to go back to verse 15. And when those who carried the ark had come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests, those carrying the ark, dipped in the edge of the water, for the Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest, the waters coming down from above stood and rose in a heap. So it was very clear here. Remember that when the priests went into the water, had any of the Israelites entered the water yet? And the answer is no. They were waiting. And so here go the priests with the ark, with the presence of God, and they get into the water, and all of a sudden the water just cuts off and dries up. Oh, sorry about that. I didn't do my phone again. So let me turn that down. Sorry about that. So what we've got then is it became very clear why the water stopped and why the ground dried up. Because God, in the presence of the ark, went into the Jordan River, and it was all him. His promise, make yourselves holy, I will be among you. And the people obeyed Joshua, and they did what it took to make themselves holy, and God showed up big time. God walked in to the Jordan River in the presence of the Ark of the Covenant with the priests, and the water cut off, stood in a heap, ground dried up. And how long did it stay that way? As we keep reading Joshua, all of the Israelites, the millions of them, whatever, crossed over, and the priest stood right there. And who's very clearly holding back the water? God is. And then when all the people are crossed over, then the priests walk up out of the Jordan River, and the Jordan River goes right back to the way it was before. So it was very, very clear that God was the one holding back the water. And then this was going to give the Israelites the confidence to go forward and conquer those cities. Because if God can do that for the Jordan River at flood stage, then God's not going to have any trouble helping Israel to fight the battle, to fight the armies of the Canaanites, which of course we know that as long as Israel was obeying the commandments, that happened. And there were mighty, mighty victories. And so verse 17 said, the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. And all Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the nation had crossed completely over Jordan. So as I read this and as we messed in here with Schlegel and I and looking at these records, you know, the two, I would say the two real huge take-home messages that I took home were, number one, you know, it is God's presence that makes us successful. Anything we can do to make God's presence more powerful, more real in our life is worth doing. And number two, I love the external, make yourselves holy. That was really, I don't have much trouble obeying God. I really don't. I don't know why. I've just been blessed that God says pray. I don't have any trouble praying. I love reading the Bible. I like talking to people about, I'm apparently not as good as Michelle. Michelle, you are amazing. Every week you come with some new story about how you witness to people. That's really fantastic. Great super witness of that, you know, but it's, you know, but here's God and he says, make yourself holy. And I just want to put it out there that, you know, if you've got things that you need to do, that where God says to do, you know, to do things like he says to pray, or he says not to be stingy or whatever, you know, give of your abundance and your material things and your time to help people, to bless people, you know, then whatever we need to do externally to get our hearts in the right place is really worth it. He that has the commandments and keeps them, Jesus Christ will really, he's not a liar. He will reveal himself to you and he will make his home with you. And there's just nothing else in the world that even compares. When you're talking to the Lord of the universe, you're getting that revelation, you get that feeling of that hand on your shoulder. You could have all the gold in the world. You could have, it wouldn't make it, nothing is better. Nothing is richer, more fulfilling than knowing you're in the loving arms and fellowship with the Lord of the universe. So this is what I want to share tonight, and happy to talk about all this stuff.